O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, Word everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. Hey, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Let's talk about the Magisterium and its authority, because that is being put into question by a theologian, one who was a consultor to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and a friend and collaborator to the late Benedict XVI. He is now putting magisterial authority into question, and I want to review those comments. You know, what's happening here is to the point of comedy, where the critics of the magisterium, the dissenters of the magisterium, have devolved into positions that have become comical. They are so nonsensical. They are so against reality, a denial of reality, that all one can do is just smile. Really, there's no substance at this point to the criticisms that are being offered against the magisterium, which I will demonstrate today. So let me go ahead and dive in here. Oh, but first, before we do so, let me remind you, hit that subscribe button, help me grow Reason and Theology so I can reach more people with this content that have been benefiting from at Reason and Theology. Okay, so this is a document, I'm sorry, a article about the theologian Father Nicola Bux. And you know, he made some comments about the magisterium and it not having any authority in its most recent authoritative act, and I need to challenge that. Look at this, however, in the comment section. We're doing this live, so I want to engage it. He says, bro will not stop talking about this document. This is hilarious. This is hilarious. It is not me who will not stop talking about this document. It is the critics. As soon as the critics stop dissenting against the magisterium and spreading misinformation, then I will no longer talk about it. But given the fact that very few are responding to these very loudmouth critics, I will continue to respond. And if you don't like it, there are plenty of other channels that you can go to. But I'll continue to address this because this is important. In fact, it's grave matter, as I'll demonstrate later on. Well, Father Nicola Bux, y'all might remember him from one of the books that he wrote a few years back about Benedict and the liturgy. And he's also, you know, written some articles and comments, and he's a liturgical scholar and so on. And again, a former consultant to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Well, he has weighed in on the most recent document of the magisterium, and he just outright says it is not magisterial. And his argumentation for it is really bad, really terrible. And that's what I want to demonstrate. Let's take a look at it here, and let's actually go through the facts. Well, here there is an article called Leading Vatican Theologian Says Fiducia Supplicans is not part of the authentic magisterium. I do have to say he is no longer a leading Vatican theologian. I don't know if he was ever leading, but he is no longer a Vatican theologian. So I think that is a little misleading, but okay. So he says Pope Francis should cancel Fiducia Supplicans and replace the prefect with a man of sure and sound and pure doctrine, to use the apostles' words to Titus, said Father Nicola Bux. Wow, okay. The respected Vatican theologian, I would contest that. Father Nicola Bux has said that Fiducia Supplicans does not belong to the authentic magisterium and called on the document's author, Cardinal Victor Fernandez, to resign. There it is. They continue to try to push for him to resign, and it's not going to happen. It's become comical at this point. Father Bux, a former consultant of the congregation, now dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, and friend and collaborator of the late Pope Benedict XVI, the very same Benedict XVI who condemns what Father Nicola Bux is doing in this article, and who actually wrote on the Magisterium with information that corrects what Father Bux is doing here, as I'll demonstrate. Yes, that Pope Benedict made his comments on Fiducia Supplicans in a recent interview with Vatican journalist Edward Penton. Bishop Joseph Strickland, always in the mix, right? The former bishop of Tyler, Texas, shared Penton's interview with Bux on X, formerly Twitter, stating, "This article should be read by every Catholic who knows and loves the church. She is the bride of Christ, and she proclaims truth with logic and charity." So it gets the approbation of Bishop Strickland. Well, all right. Let's see what it says. Bux told Penton, "For sure, Fiducia Supplicans does not belong to the authentic magisterium." You hear that? "And is therefore not binding." So he's telling people, you don't have to assent to this. It is not binding, because what is affirmed in it is not contained in the written or transmitted word of God, and which the church, the Roman pontiff, or the college of bishops either definitively, that is by solemn judgment, or with ordinary and universal magisterium, proposes to believe as divinely revealed. Look, if you have been studying the magisterium, if you've taken my magisterium course, or if you've just simply read the Profession of Faith of 1998, or if you have read the doctrinal commentary on it by Bertone and Ratzinger, you would be seeing right now the problem. It should be jumping out at you right now. What's the problem? Well, a couple of things. Number one, he's saying it's not binding because it's not written or contained in the word of God, blah, 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 blah. Where does that come from? Where is this a copy and paste from? Again, it should be jumping out at you, the profession of faith, right? Profession of faith. If you don't know it, go and learn it. After the Nicene Creed, there are then 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph deals with dogmas. Second paragraph deals with what might be called dogmatic facts. Third paragraph deals with non-definitive teachings. Now, what he just quoted to you is from the first paragraph. What's the problem? What's the problem with this? He is using the criteria found for dogmatic teachings and using that in a discussion about Fiducia Supplicans. Now, I have another question. Has Pope Francis put Fiducia Supplicans forward as dogmatic? No. Nobody has ever even suggested as much. Of course not. It would be impossible for him to do that, because it was a document released by the congregation, or now dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, with papal approbation. So if he wanted to dogmatically define this, this would most likely be in an apostolic constitution. It wouldn't be by anything released from the offices of the dicastery, because you cannot, the Pope cannot delegate his infallible teaching authority. And the whole issue of ordinary and universal magisterium, again, this is the College of Bishops, has nothing to do with this discussion. We are not talking about that which is dogmatic in nature. Nobody has ever said that. So what he does is he does a bait and switch. He says, look, guys, Fiducia Supplicans is not magisterial. Let me prove it to you. It doesn't meet this standard, and the standard that he gave to us is for dogmas. Whereas what we're talking about are third paragraph teachings. what's called the ordinary magisterium of the Pope, what's called merely ordinary magisterium. This is the category of what we're discussing, not dogmas. So he's not even getting the language right. But watch what he does with this bait and switch. After setting up false criteria, he then shifts to one cannot even adhere to it with religious assent of intellect and will. Now, religious assent of intellect and will is the assent owed to which paragraph? Teachings of which paragraph? Well, it's certainly not paragraph 1. It's not paragraph 2. You guessed it. It's paragraph 3. So watch what he does here. Fiducia Supplicans is not authentic magisterium, and that's because it doesn't meet this standard of dogma, and therefore we ought not to give it religious submission of intellect and will. What in the world is going on here? Why the bait and switch? Here's the criteria. If it has been proposed by the Pope in his ordinary magisterium, you are to give it religious submission of intellect and will. And now the question is, well, has the Pope done that? Well, of course he has. Here's Fiducia Supplicans. On the 18th of December, 2023, Pope Francis received it in common form. Now, if you look at, again, the document that Ratzinger wrote, his friend and collaborator, tells him this is magisterial. Look at paragraph 18 of Donum Veritatis. The Roman pontiff fulfills his universal mission with the help of the various bodies of the Roman Curia, and in particular with that of the congregation, now dicastery, for the doctrine of faith in matters of doctrine and morals. Consequently, the documents issued by this congregation expressly approved by the Pope. So documents issued by the congregation, by the dicastery, approved by the Pope. Notice it does not specify it has to be in specific form. It's either in common or specific form. They participate in the ordinary magisterium of Peter. And by the way, you can also know that because in the very document where you have Pope Pius X condemning public dissent, which is what Father is doing here, which the Pope calls a grave sin. So what the renowned theologian is doing here is gravely sinful, according to Pope Pius X. Not only that, he notes that which has been submitted to the decisions of the biblical commission relating to doctrine which have been given in the past and shall be given in the future in the same way as the decrees of the Roman congregations and are approved by the Pope, these are something that we are bound to accept in conscience. Now, this is important because at the time, the biblical commission participated in the papal magisterium. And he's saying, whenever the biblical commission at this time puts forward a decision, you're bound to assent to it with religious submission of intellect and will because it now participates in the Pope's magisterium. And he notes it just simply has to be approved by the Pope. Now, if you were to go to the biblical commission documents that he's referring to, are they approved in common form or specific form? Hint. There are a number of ones that I can think of off the top of my head that are in common form. And yet the Pope says it's binding on one's conscience. Ergo, what we see here from Donum Veritatis, when it refers to expressly approved by the Pope, it's both either common form or specific form. And I would argue Fiducia Supplicans is at the very least common form, because clearly right there. But either way, common form, specific form, there it is. You are to assent to it according to the profession of faith with religious submission of intellect and will. How do we know that? Well, it says it right here in the profession of faith. And again, the very friend and person that he collaborated with, that is Father Bux. Well, if you go to the commentary of his friend, that is Ratzinger, and just read this section on third paragraph truths. He'll go into this in further detail. And again, that same Ratzinger condemns what this priest is now doing. Because not only is it magisterial and binding on one's conscience, there's this whole section here in Donum Veritatis that his friend, Pope Benedict XVI at the time, Ratzinger, wrote, paragraphs 32 through 41. Against public dissent, which is what the priest is doing. Father Nicola is engaging in public dissent. He's saying, not only am I not going to accept the document, you too, you also don't have to accept it. That's called public dissent, which is condemned by this document. That's not just mere criticism. That's just not asking questions. That's not Canon 212 criteria. This is public dissent, which, by the way, comes from, according to the document, philosophical liberalism, which is interesting. It does not matter how many Latin masses Father Nicola celebrates, he's still engaging in philosophical liberalism when he does this. Ironic, right? Since many of the traditionalists have adopted and borrowed from liberalism whenever they dissent against the magisterium. They have become the very thing that they criticize. So he is, again, 100% false here. We do owe religious submission of intellect and will. It is authentic magisterium, according to his own former friend. And he has to grapple with it. He has to engage that. Now, show us why this is not the case. Show us why Fiducia Supplicans does not meet the criteria of third paragraph teachings. Explain that to us, since the signature is right there. If Francis's name was not on that and he did not approve of it, he would have an argument. But this little bit right here makes it common form approbation, and per Donum Veritatis makes it authentic at magisterium, third paragraph teaching, and thus does require religious submission of intellect and will on our part. I do also have to remind you, since we are having this discussion of Constantinople IV, the Eighth Ecumenical Council, that also condemns what Father Nicola is doing here. It says this: we also decree that, knowing this is Canon 21, and at the very least, it's still morally applicable. I'm not arguing for a canonical application. I'm just simply arguing for a moral application. We also decree that no one at all should compose or compile writings and tracts against the most holy Pope of Elder Rome, with the excuse that certain charges are apparently in circulation. This is what Photius recently did, and Dioscorus likewise a long time ago. Anyone who has shown such arrogance and rashness, their words, not mine, as to utter insults against the see of Peter, the prince of the apostles, whether in writing or otherwise. So this is not just synodally. This is not just in a council. This is just composing or writing certain tracts. As Photius and Dioscorus did, what's the consequence for them? Is to receive a condemnation that is equal and identical to theirs. What was their condemnation? It was an anathema. It was an anathema, if you don't recall your church history. So, again, I'm not arguing for a canonical application here. I'm arguing for a moral application. The fathers of this council saw it morally reprehensible to the point that they would issue an anathema against this, to the point that they say a person who does this can't be saved. Their words, not mine. Now, obviously, it's referring to a person who does this, who doesn't repent and has full consent of the intellect and will. I get all that. My point is, the council fathers were not under the impression that you can publicly dissent against the magisterium the way Father Nicola is doing. In fact, they say it's grave matter. Pope Pius X says grave matter, grave sin, grave guilt. And they, again, issue an anathema. Again, look, note here. Nor can all those escape the note of disobedience and temerity. This is Pope Pius X, and consequently of grave sin, who in speech or writing contradict such decisions. What decisions? The decisions of the Roman congregations approved by the Pope, which is literally what Fiducia Supplicans is. Pope Pius X, the hammer of heretics, the one who is against modernism, condemns what Father Nicola is doing. And this besides the scandal they give. So don't talk to me about Pope Francis causing scandal. No, it is these people who cause scandal and the other reasons for which they may be responsible before God for other temerities and errors, which generally go with such contradictions. And I can give you an avalanche. I mean, just a whole cornucopia of papal magisterial documents and conciliar documents that condemn what Father Nicola is doing. So not only is he factually wrong, this is grave matter according to our faith. So the gaslighter who came in here earlier saying, oh, Michael, why, he won't just stop talking about the document. Excuse me. I will continue to talk about this issue that is grave matter as long as these guys continue to dissent and with a very, very wide reach, disseminate false information and lead souls astray and lead souls potentially to the lake of fire. I will continue to speak against that, whether you like it or not. And as soon as they stop talking about it, then I won't have to respond to it. Right? But if they continue to dissent and mislead numerous souls, and there's really not a whole lot of other people engaging this stuff, then I'm bound in conscience to respond. Believe me, I would rather do some other things with my time. There's plenty of other things I would rather talk about. But I'm bound in conscience when I see an error like this that is impacting souls and their eternal destiny, and I can do something about it. If I were to be silent and just let it go, I now share in their actions. I'm now guilty with them. I share in their acts of leading people astray because I could have spoken up and I didn't. So the gaslighters, people like that, they've tried to deter people from responding to this stuff. Yeah, it's just not going to work. And if you're tired of hearing about Fiducia Supplicans, so am I. Go and take that up with the critics, because that's literally all they talk about every single day, nonstop. So take your frustrations out with them and express that to them, not to the people who are having to respond to this. I want to leave you with this. I want to show you something else. Not only did we see a failure to really engage the issues intellectually here from Father, I want to show you a lack of critical thinking on part of Father elsewhere. This is just one among many places. Father Nicola Bux, the pandemic was a warning to men of the church. A warning from what? Watch this. Watch this. He began with a warning to church leaders about idolatry and what many see as a thinly veiled reference to the Pachamama worship that took place during last October's Amazon Synod. Books called idolatry the gravest sin. And he said, we gave into idolatry by kneeling before heaps of earth and worshiping idolatrous statues, even in St. Peter's Basilica. Well, first of all, he can't even get his facts straight. Second of all, notice the lack of critical thinking here. So the pandemic is the result of us worshiping an idol in St. Peter's Basilica, according to him, in reference to, again, the Pachamama issue. Now, y'all already know I've done 2 in-depth and pretty much exhaustive videos at this point. One walking through the ceremony itself, showing that it was not worship, nor was it even Pachamama. And then number 2, I did a whole video showing you how this controversy is an artificial controversy that was created by Catholic media and secular media. I outlined it for you. I showed you all of the facts. I showed you how the story developed, and I show you how what they were reporting is contrary to the facts. Now, I want to ask the question, if he was this poor in exercising critical thinking in this area, I kind of wonder if we're seeing that here as well. You'll notice a lot of the people who enjoyed some prominence under Benedict the 16th, who no longer enjoy that under Pope Francis, seem to be very intent on critiquing in a very unhealthy way Pope Francis. You'll notice that, right? It's pretty interesting. Wow. If you can't get this right over here with the Pachamama issue, yeah, I'm not so sure that I really think that you're going to think through the issues of Fiducia Supplicans very critically and carefully. If you gave this other knee-jerk reaction that is contrary to the facts elsewhere, I kind of wonder if you're doing that here also with Fiducia Supplicans. And the rest of the article is atrocious. It's incredibly obnoxious, the rest of the article, with LifeSite News. And it's filled with misinformation. He's still hung up on the fact that he says the 2015 dubias haven't been answered. Where you been, Father? Did you miss the memo? Really? There was that whole response recently to an Amoris Laetitia dubia that the DDF released just a few months ago that covers the whole thing, that answers all the questions. Not that the questions weren't answered before anyway, but it was answered again here, even more exhaustively and explicitly. Did he not get the memo or something? He's still expecting a future probe to respond to the 5 dubia from 2016. It's comical at this point how out of date and out of touch these people are with reality. And brings me back full circle to my original point. The critics, they have nothing left. It's become comical at this point. They don't have any actual arguments that grapple with the evidence and with the facts. All they can do is continue to spin narratives and promote propaganda and capitalize on people's ignorance. That's all they can do. Well, I hope y'all are seeing this for what it is. Hit that like button and the subscribe button. Check me out, of course, at patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to financially support the show. But again, hit that subscribe button to help me reach more people, again, to try help offset this misinformation and propaganda that they are spreading. All right, see you later. God bless. For years, Catholics have been made to feel humiliated and ashamed for defending the Pope and the teachings of the Church. This shaming comes not only from non-Catholics, but even from fellow Catholics who mock the Pope and fight against the Church's teachings. Are you sick of being made to feel embarrassed for standing with the Church? I stand with you. For several years, I've been producing content showing why we can be confident in clinging to the Catholic Magisterium. If you stand for restoring support for the Church, help me continue this mission of producing apologetic content that defends the Magisterium by becoming a supporter on Patreon. The link is below, patreon.com/reason and theology. Christus vincit. Have you ever noticed that certain Catholic teachings are classified differently? For example, some are called dogmas and others are called doctrines. And then a denial of one of these teachings might be called heretical, while a denial of another might just be called an error. In reality, there are many classifications to various teachings that may be found in the Catholic Church. In my course, The Theological Notes, I offer a crash course on this system that will prepare you to identify a teaching's classification more easily. And I'll also help you determine what level of assent or adherence you are required as a Catholic to give to a particular doctrine. So, if you would like to take this course, visit reason.podia.com.